Hello and welcome to the Dev Game Club podcast. This is a podcast in which two veteran game developers play games from the past and discuss their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo, and I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, a man who has finally been able to press that do not touch button.
Brett Duville. Okay, that wasn't the one that I thought you were going to introduce me with.
There's no way. Yeah, there's no way.
No.
Did you press the do not touch button?
I tried to press the do not touch button. I assume it blows up the ship, but I don't know what it is.
Oh, no, you got to do it. You got to go back and do it. I'm not even going to spoil it.
No, I thought you were going to use master of the rock because I thought that was a particularly dumb phrase on Kerona. But you may not have gotten that far, actually.
No, I haven't gotten that far.
Oh, that's why. Now I spoiled one for next week. Oh, well.
No, that's
there
okay.
will be other opportunities. We're joking here around the beginning of Space Quest 1, and I guess it's kind of appropriate that we be joking about it because this is the more humorous version of the Quest, or not even the Quest games, but of the Sierra games. And I think that's actually more in keeping with what I think about when I think about the studio and adventure games in general, graphic adventure games. So it is kind of fun. Although the humor here is different from the humor that you'll see in LucasArts, obviously. Just because of who the writers are, I'm sure, and their sorts of concerns. These are people who definitely were influenced by Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I would think, and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, and I mean, Star Generator, Star Destroyer, May the Farce be with you. Yeah, so a lot of little Star Wars. But it's, there's good, you kind of find a device that's a tricorder kind of thing. So, it's science fiction all across the board. And one of my earliest, like I think I said last episode, similar to starting up King's Quest for me, I just had a very similar but even more intensified nostalgic moment when I started this one back up. The theme song and just seeing the logo, and like I said last time, like I have a lot of fond memories with my dad playing, because these are some of the earliest games that we played together. Adventure games, I think we talked about this last time too, but adventure games lend themselves well to that kind of, fake co-op, where you're playing together.
Shared experience,
Shared experience and kind of trying to figure out and as I said last time as well, but just to continue repeating myself, my dad ultimately, I think these also were the games that broke him, because he's really not a gamer and he hasn't really been much of one throughout his life. But I think he would just get so frustrated with the puzzles and some of the just opacity with some of the stuff in this game in particular that's coming back to me now. Just like, oh yeah, I remember why he would rage quit and just run from the room or throw something, or right. It's like, what? And then I would stick with it, and I would just kind of slowly work my way through it and get stuck. And I can't wait till we get to the next session, because one of my fondest memories of getting stuck in any game ever is in that section. It's the one I always use when I talk about that with designers and things like that. So I can't wait. Yeah, you might already be there.
Is it the beams? Maybe.
No, it's it's at the end. I think it's basically before you get off. It's right before you get off.
Before you leave.
It's the last thing you need to do.
Yes, I didn't get that far. I actually have already realized, I think you had said that this was a game where you got all the way to the end of it and you realized you had missed something. Yeah, so one of the macro topics that I wanted to talk about for sure that is more prevalent in this game, because King's Quest, like we talked about, has a little bit more of an open world structure, right? So you can kind of you can go back and forth to places and correct some of your thoughts if you feel like you missed something. There's a few exceptions where you can't do that. But this one, because there's sort of points of no return, right? And there's more linearity to it. I believe that happened to me multiple times, and I'm already having anxiety because I don't remember everything. I think I left the Arcada, which is, I think, how they want you to pronounce it, but I can't figure out what that joke is from. Is that a joke? Because it should be Arcada, but anyway,
That's how they pronounce it in the manual. So anyway, I feel like I've left something on the Arcada, but I can't be sure.
Well, did you get the Astral Body cartridge?
Yes.
See, that I didn't get.
Okay, so that is,
and I can explain why, right? Because so what happened to me was, and I did end up playing more than we had talked about, just because I was on stream and I had gotten off of the space station in well under an hour, maybe not well under an hour, but around an hour, and I had a couple of hours, so I put some more time in and did some stuff on Kerona, but I went into the room with the and saw the cutscene with the scientist and tried to figure out the
you
computer.
did. Okay, so because that's one of those.
Yeah, that's a weird one because you have to
one of those timing things, right?
Back, yes.
And I don't even know if it's I don't think you have to pass it and come back. I think it's literally you can just go and wait. It's felt inconsistent to me, and we talked about that with King's Quest as well. That one of their quote unquote mechanics is just timing and waiting. Mm-hmm. And it's that's a frustrating thing. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I didn't figure out how to get the cartridge, and I was like, well, I'll come back to this then because I'm missing something here, and maybe seeing some other stuff on the station will make me figure that out. Mm-hmm. And then I went down the elevator and I got shot once by a thing, so I had to redo some of stuff. And then I realized you could hide or get back in the elevator and avoid that if you heard footsteps, which was another just kind of weird mechanic. But I was like, okay. And then I went onto the bridge.
Gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. And then I went onto the bridge and I looked at a screen in there and said, there's 13 minutes or whatever until self-destruct. And I was like, oh. And then I basically hustled through the rest of the level, entirely forgetting that I had not figured out that thing. I mean, I had written it down, and I'm glad I did because I probably would not have realized later.
Oh, yeah.
But it was in my notes, and I just was like, oh, that's right. There was this thing I was trying to figure out. And I didn't. And I was like, that's probably important. Because the scientist and all that stuff, right? So I basically hustled through, and I didn't find any of that particularly difficult, except that there was something I was just missing with that computer. I mean, I'll go back and look at it, but I know I'm gonna have to restart this game, but that's fine. It's pretty quick to play through these sections, especially. I mean, most of the time is in figuring it out. So
yeah. Well, and that's, it's kind of probably a takeaway we'll do next episode for both games. But, the age of measuring playtime based on, that's the weird thing about it.
Yeah,
exactly. That's the weird thing about
really do that anymore. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's measured on actual playtime. You know what I mean? Versus perceived or retread or even the concept of like replayability is something you lean into now and you design around and focus on if that's a goal for the project versus replayability based on in these franchises versus LucasArts, it's even based on death, right? It's like, you're actually punished. And kind of a minor, I guess it's not I don't want to spoil too much for you, but once you get that cartridge, I'll just spoil it for you because I don't, it's not a big deal, but it's not like a story thing. But one thing I found that I didn't remember from playing before is once you get the cartridge and you try to put the cartridge into the computer to kind of like look at it, if you think that that's possible, they basically just have a guard come in and shoot you.
Jeez.
And it happens every time. Like it's basically just nope, don't do that. Because I tested it out a bunch of different ways. I tried to see if I could leave and then come back and do it. And, but it's just their way of saying no, it's a trial by error. So,
and the other thing too is I think that these days, I mean, since there are so many games, the other thing is that people who make short games will just say, look, it's a short game, and that may not appeal to the whole audience.
You embrace the length. Yeah,
I worked on Tacoma, which you can certainly play. I can speed through that thing in like 10 minutes because I know where everything is. Yeah. And I mean, that's not the way to experience that game. But even if you're going and looking at everything, it's not even a 6-hour game. But you're doing basically no retreading. There are no frustration points where you're annoyed. Whereas here, of course, that's very much the model. We're going to make you beat your head against something, and I don't know if they'd even say they'd count that as, I mean, I don't know if they were worried about playtime. It wasn't a thing that was necessarily on the back of the box, but I think that was certainly the expectation, though, is that you were not going to just breeze through it unless you were a real expert sort of player of these sorts of things. And even then, you never know. That's the thing about puzzles, is you never know what puzzle is just going to completely stymie somebody because they don't know.
Yeah.
And it's unfair at times in this game because you don't know. I was playing on stream and I got to a point where I was done. I had failed and I didn't know it. I had gone down into the caves beneath Kerona and I didn't have what I needed to get through that, but I couldn't go back. There was an elevator that wouldn't go back up. So I was just stuck and I didn't know. And I mean, part of that frustration was useful because I found a room that I wouldn't have found otherwise. I mean, there's that sort of happens naturally when you're frustrated, is that you prod the edges of the game a lot more and you find stuff. So I went back outside and I found that room with some alien in it. And he keeps turning me into a basketball and killing me. And I find those things because I'm lost. And because I keep dying and so some of that stuff actually works, but when you get to a point where you literally can't progress and there's no way to know, that just feels unfair.
And I'd be interested to, we're still working on seeing if we can get a guest, or some guest for this. So I don't know. But if we do, it'd be interesting to talk to them about the playtesting and usability process of this era, and even when, because I would say easily the two big competitors were LucasArts and Sierra, right? They had their own directions, so to speak, but it'd be interesting to hear if they had any of those discussions as they progress, because obviously we won't have time to play any of the rest, but there are 6 Space Quest games, and I'd be interested to see, like, from a usability standpoint, how they progressed over time and how the industry was influencing them as well. Because these games, initially, because they were top of the heap, they were selling really well. So there was probably a lot of reasons for them not to feel like they needed to improve certain things, but I'd love to hear what were the catalysts for them to think about improving stuff like that, right? Whether it be feedback for, oh, you failed, or, feedback on the logic of the world and the puzzle ordering and all of that sort of stuff. Because obviously it got better and better, right? And I think from a closed circuit kind of way, LucasArts basically won the adventure game design paradigm, because I think that's where everyone goes now, right? That's what
therefore they won the enormous audience.
Yeah, right. They won the prize. Good luck.
Justify this thing continuing forever.
Yeah,
I mean, because adventure games are dead, right? I've been hearing that. For a long
of course,
time.
yeah. But I mean, but I mean, as an example, though, like something like The Walking Dead or something, right? The natural progression of where Telltale went with stuff, right? Same thing, right? It's, you either know you're in a sequence where you're going to fail because it's like a mini action sequence or something and a zombie's coming at you or whatever, or that it's a closed circuit and you just have to figure out the puzzle and then move on. There's no sense of like, well, if I make a wrong, if I eat this candy bar instead of give the candy bar to somebody else, I'm going to fail. It's like, no, you can do either, or you can't eat the candy bar. So, anyway, a dumb example, but, so I don't know. Playing these has been bringing up some of these, I think, things that I just basically pushed down into my psyche and forgotten about and purged from my memory because I probably had so much trauma over it. Because you end up, as a kid playing these, it's like you're playing them over and over and over again, and the frustration. Again, I'll tell the story next episode on that moment I was talking about, but and there's a really good reason why it's my favorite memory of like being stuck in a video game ever. But it's just, how is it not obvious that this wasn't a good idea to do this kind of stuff, but
Right.
But it's hindsight 2020. So,
well, and it's also the like we said last week, the market was different. These were people who had just been playing text adventures, which are often much tougher than this
punishing,
game,
right? I mean,
and can be fairly punishing. Yeah, I mean, certainly something like Deadline, which I described, is a possibly difficult game. It's insane how difficult that game is, and it's hard to imagine. And I think they were trying to extend. They were trying to extend to that audience rather than to extend the audience altogether, Mm-hmm. So, but they were trying to introduce something new to that existing audience, I think, rather than saying, "Oh, we have something new that might bring in new people," and that's something we definitely do not do anymore. I mean, that's certainly you and I working on Public Commando, we're trying to bring Star Wars to a wider audience rather than really concentrating down on what do the hardcore Star Wars game fans want, because that was a much smaller audience than obviously the people that seen the movies or whatever.
Right.
So
yeah. And then on the flip side of that, I guess I will say that the thing that I really appreciate about this one, I would say even maybe more than King's Quest, is there's sort of attention to detail on, like, I feel like this one, at least from this first section, is kind of weirdly meticulous with some of the things that it requires you to do in kind of a, I don't know. I think the reason that this one resonated with me so much is I was such a big science fiction fan as a kid, and Star Wars fan and stuff. And the agency you had was cool, right? And the concept that even things like you had to open the bay doors before you could leave, and then that was in another room, and you had to think to do that. And your point about like the timer, which I actually forgot about, the timer being in the bridge so you can see when the self-destruct, happens. Right. I totally forgot about that, and I didn't look at the screens up there. But the fact that isn't just on the screen, that it's actually on the screen all the time. It's that you actually, if you want that information, you have to go to the bridge and find it. And so there's sort of like this cohesive world that has an internal logic that kind of makes sense for the game, or even just the bay, the hangar stuff in general, right? Like getting the suit before you go out and all this, and the airlock and all these sort of space logic kinds of things. And then even just leaving, right. Put your seatbelt on. And
that was pretty funny, actually, because of course you have this tension of like, oh, the thing's going to blow any second. And it's making me put on my seatbelt, and that's a great moment. Yeah. I will say that there's also, because they are leaning into space stuff which isn't real, they're trying to require less of an audience's back knowledge.
I have that same note, actually. Yeah, that there's a common vocabulary for King's Quest because it's pretty collectively known things, but here it's like, do I call it a console or a computer, or what are my verbs, and what does this, this is space. This is a space thing. So like, what do I call this stuff? Or the gadget, right? So,
So there's a gadget, and but also just the idea that I don't have to know a ton of stuff about space,
right,
to solve the puzzles here. Whereas you have to know stuff about fairy tales.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, they've
you might argue that fairy tales should be pretty well known, but now that I'm from years old, I don't really remember those as clearly because my kids aren't even so young that I remember telling them stories like that. So it's really just, there's a lot of distance now, and pulling that back, it came back, but I had to kind of soak in it for a week. If I had tried to solve it all in one afternoon, it would have been basically impossible for me to do.
Yeah.
I would have had to cheat.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other related point I wrote down, kind of spinning off of that, is I always appreciate, and this is actually a conversation that we still have today quite a bit, I would say, depending on what obviously franchise you're working in or what have you, but having the main character be kind of having the main character correlate to the player in a knowledge base, kind of level of knowledge way is kind of, I don't know how intentional that was for them, but the concept that the janitor doesn't know how any of this stuff works because he's never had access to it. So you're discovering how things work with him as a player. You know, you don't have more information than he has and vice versa. And so kind of the reason I bring that up is some of the texts and responses that they have written for some of the actions are kind of as if I were there doing it myself. You know, it's like, well, you don't know what this room does, or you don't, you know what I mean? You have no clues because you're not a scientist or whatever. And so you're figuring out, oh, okay, I got to put the spacesuit on, and where do I press the airlock button? Oh, okay, here it is, you know. And I like it when games try to, you know, correlate those two things together. It's not easy to do sometimes, but it's that, you know, it's that empty vessel kind of notion.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think that this game definitely does that a lot better. It sort of reminds me of Guybrush in that way, because Guybrush is aspirational, right? I mean, he wants to be a pirate, just like whatever 14-year-old kid playing the game might want to be. And so there's just that tie where here maybe we don't want to be, well, we want to be the space hero. But we have to start from space zero, I guess.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Did you come on? You primed that up. That was
no. That's good. Okay. Off the cuff. Thank you.
Nice. Well, yeah, and that kind of every person, you know, kind of mentality, and that it's like you're the last one to save the galaxy, and there's no way that a janitor could do it, but you're gonna do it, you know, and of course, as you can imagine, over the series, you know, 6 games, Roger Wilco becomes quite a hero. So, yeah,
does he?
He does. Yeah, he keeps going back to janitorial work, but then they keep bringing him back.
That's funny. It's interesting because I haven't played a Leisure Suit Larry game, which is one of the other, when I think of Sierra, these are definitely the 3 that first come to mind. And maybe Gabriel Knight and Phantasmagoria. I mean, they did a lot of stuff.
And
they were doing this actively and Heroes Quest, right? That one I don't really have.
Quest for Glory, yeah.
Quest for Glory.
It had two different names, but yeah. Gabriel Knight was pretty big too. I had fond memories of that one too. They had all those, but Al Lowe, was the Leisure Suit Larry guy. But.
Right, but what I was going to say about that is that that's a character who doesn't really seem to change. And that's kind of the point of that character, right? He's always trying to get the girls, but he can't get the girls. And then I don't really know, because I don't know King's Quest all that well. I don't know how that one progresses, but it is basically Graham in every story, right?
Well, what they end up, they do that for a while, but what they end up doing is kind of going through his lineage. Right?
Oh, I see. That gives you a chance to reset.
Yeah, as he gets older, he becomes the king from the first one, right? The old king, and then I think his daughter takes over at one point, and so they kind of go in a couple different directions with it, and they go to different lands, right? And there's, different villains and stuff. They definitely get more cohesive as stories, but. Yeah.
I wonder, playing Space Quest now, if this was an influence on it, because he didn't bring it up on Anachronox, on Tom Hall.
Oh yeah.
Definitely has a little bit of that feel, even though of course his character a little bit more. I would say tonally, it feels very similar.
Yeah. I've enjoyed reliving some of the silly jokes that were, thrown out there like that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty funny. It's funnier than I expected. I guess I didn't really know until I was reading the manual that it was a comedy, or that it had comic elements. Yeah, and then I saw that he was the janitor. I was like, oh, okay, this is a funny game. You can kind of tell right from the get go with that, and that's good too.
Well, and because he's that here, it's that hero to zero thing. That I think, because I stopped when I got to the planet, but I remember, again, kind of that correlation between the player and and the character both kind of being fish out of water, right? And that concept of landing on the planet for the first time, crash landing on the planet, and this sense that you're going on this grand space adventure. You know what I mean? You're like, you're on another planet now. You know, you got to get out. It's just that feeling of it versus, say, King's Quest, which was kind of more of an established. There's a character there, right? And there was a different world with different rules, and it's like you're just kind of figuring out this fairy tale world. Here, it's sort of like, well, what is it like to crash land on a planet, you know, and I got to get myself out of this, and I found the survival kit, and you know, it's still a humorous game and it's not like a survival game or anything, but I just remember loving and reliving that last night, is that kind of that planet hopping space opera feel of it, you know, grand space adventure is just a neat aspect of it.
The other thing I really liked, and this is more prevalent, I guess, on Kerona, but is that there's a sense of, am I going to be able to go there because of the split screen, or I don't really know how to describe it, but bifurcating the space in such a way that you can't actually directly reach part of the screen. And on the ship, it's just taking elevators, and so it's not kind of a big deal. It's obvious how you get from one to the other. But when you get to Kerona, you basically might have to go multiple screens. And actually, at one point, I had gone and been like, I can't go any further. And then I went back, and I was like, no, wait a minute. Of course I can, because that was that cliff I had seen before, and I'm now in a different spot. And I went around, and of course, that's when I ended up getting stuck. But because I got to those arches or whatever long before I should have. But I thought that was really, really neat and a much better use of the space than in King's Quest, where basically the whole screen is effectively available to you. You might have to swim to get from one side to the other or whatever. And there are a couple cases where you can see across the stream, but you can't get there because the bridges are blocked. But again, that just feels like a continuous thing with a door you have to unlock, rather than several screens away you're going to find a way to get back to here, which is really, really nice and makes the world feel explorable in a way. We talked about this back. The first time I ever really talked about level design was in connection with Outlaws, actually, the Darren Stinnett's game. Because he described how, there were, and I think you and I may have even talked about this back in the day, but how there were places in levels where you could see ahead and you'd be thinking, how am I going to be able to get up there? And you could see that it was a walkable area. It was clear, or maybe there was even an enemy up there or something like that. But, and it was especially, I think, like the Pueblo area where you could often see these places where, how am I going to get there? And then, of course, that becomes part of what you do in like an Indiana Jones game. So it's really interesting. Those aspects feel like something that's in a modern action adventure in a way, because that's still part of like Tomb Raider today. How am I going to get up there?
Yeah, and I think we talked about it with Super Metroid. Like that's, I think one of the formulas was really generated during that era, especially with the Metroid games and stuff. And then carried through. Yeah, I'm glad that came up. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the notes I was excited to talk about that never dawned on me back in the day when I played it originally is that split screen thing. And essentially, it does add in a level design, essentially puzzle or navigation that is, I think, more usable. And I'd be interested to know if they did that learning from King's Quest, or if it was just a separate original idea that they wanted to fool with so they could see the relative nature of spaces. But, you know, an example, the easiest example is on the first ship that, I don't know, it's like a little moment of brilliance, I would say. It's maybe I'm over tagging it there, but you know, the body that you need that has the key card is through a wall
as a dead end.
it'll be a dead end. And so you can get there, and you search everybody else, and they have that great joke that they keep saying over and over again. I don't know if you searched everybody, but it's like,
I searched a couple. Yes, you search the whole body and you find nothing.
So literally they have that joke every time, except for that one guy, right? So you're like, oh, I know there's that guy over there, so how do I get over there? But it's just
that's funny. I went in his direction first. It just happened.
Oh yeah, see, so that was lucky.
So I went through the computer room, and then I went to him, and so then I was searching the other bodies, expecting to find stuff because I had found stuff on this guy.
Oh yeah,
the first guy.
Yeah.
So that was kind of funny. And after a while, I was like, oh, it didn't occur to me that there was a potential for playing that off as a kind of timing joke of building up like, nope, still nothing.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. Yeah. And then the other thing the split screen thing reminds me of is, I'd have to look up the date. But Out of This World had, do you remember, or what was the original name? Out of This World or
Another World?
Another World. Yeah. They had similar split screen stuff. Remember where they had your buddy was down below and you were above, and like you were running off screen and then coming down, like, so it was kind of like this pseudo platforming kind of feel there too. And that probably was after this, now that I think about it.
Yeah, it was much after. This was 1991.
Oh, was it? Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, interesting thing. I just forgot. I forgot that they did that in this game. And I think it is a really interesting problem solving technique for, the macro navigation of King's Quest was all about, did you draw your paper map out well,
right?
And can you navigate and keep all of those things in your head? I didn't draw a map for the ship at all because I didn't need to, but just having those two layers just gives you a better sense of space and relativity than having the full screen. So that was an interesting little thing there.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot, and I felt like it was another way to, because effectively, basically, they're just getting more out of each screen too. So it's really economical from the standpoint of design, especially having to come up with these things, and because basically there's so much wasted space in most King's Quest screens, and part of that is because they have creatures on some of those screens that are chasing you and things like that, and so you actually need room to react and flee from them. So there is a reason, but as I said last time, I didn't really care about those things all that much, and they felt a little pointless to me. I mean, they worked a little bit better for you, so that it's just a matter of taste, I guess. But I sort of felt like here, I'd much rather have them have more use of an interesting use of that space
screen,
right, to really get something more out of every screen. Seems like a good investment in design time to me.
Well, and structurally, King's Quest was maybe a little bit more literally the text adventure structure, right, where you go in a direction and you're kind of you're in one location in that direction, and it's a full screen kind of location in your head, at least, right?
Right.
But there's a minor innovation with King's Quest because you go left or right or whatever, and there's sort of two spaces there. And I think some of the tension they wanted between the pseudo stealth, alien mechanic, and then kind of going down an elevator and then seeing that guy come in and he just missed you kind of thing. There's maybe some tension there they wanted. Such a funny. I had forgotten about that until I got shot the first time, and it's such a funny little thing that they had put in a minor stealth mechanic.
Yeah, that was the point at which I was. Someone on stream pointed out, "Go ahead, just save all the time if you want." I was like, "Oh yeah, I should probably save more often than I'm doing."
Yeah, totally.
Because it is just so. It's such an unnatural style to me to risk death all the time, even though the deaths are funny, and I'm actually happy I find them. I deliberately went and found a couple. There are a couple of good ones on Kerona that I liked quite a lot. And of course, the ending screen is always basically like, "Oh, yep, you failed to save the universe. Because you're such a clod. You've just doomed all of humanity."
Yeah.
And So sorry, maybe try to do better.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the hindsight 2020 point about kind of the punishing aspect of it. At least they do lean into deaths in both games where they have fun with it, So there is a little bit of that morbid curiosity about like what are the different interesting ways you can die. There's games that embrace that, right? But the stealth thing is just funny.
Landscape Torment.
There's no. Oh yeah, right. Yeah, and quite literally, yeah. That's a good example. I just think there's it's not a mechanics driven game. So just having that stealth thing is because you can only walk so fast. So it's like there's nothing nothing you can really do when you see that if you're not in a good position. So.
I was, I thought, I might have time to get to that next doorway. Like that's what I thought was happening, but no, what I really needed to do, just hop right back on the elevator because I was right in front of it. But it was kind of a funny little bit of just like, what's going on? Yeah. You hear footsteps like, oh no. And I did at one point hear footsteps on the keycard side, and there you're trapped because
oh yeah, I was wondering if that would happen. Yeah,
you have to get the key card in and push the button or whatever and open the door. And I was really, really worried.
Yeah.
But I don't know if they actually kill you there. But they didn't kill me, so it was a good moment of tension. On top of the tension I was already feeling about, I only have how many minutes? I don't know how long it's been since I looked at that thing. How much time do I have left? And scrambling to get out of there.
Yeah, talk about a rough opening of a game in general, right? You have a timer that you don't even know about.
That you don't even know about.
You have enemies that you can't do anything about as well. All you can do is just hide or run off screen or something, so it's like a double whammy it's not the way that a lot of games open anymore.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
Timer.
That's for sure. All right, you want to take a quick break and then come back and do some emails and feedback?
I think that's good.
Welcome back from the break. We usually like to take some time each episode to listen to feedback and read reviews and get to your emails. We are going to do 2 of each this week. So thank you for sending those in. We love to have your reviews on Apple Podcasts. I'm subscribed around the world and get them from most countries. If for some reason we don't read yours, and I may simply have missed your country, so just shoot us an email as well. I'll give the email in the second part. But first, Tim, I gave you a review to read from a friend of ours, somebody who's written in before.
Yeah, entertaining, insightful, and excellent from Dan Hunter. Hunter Guernsey? Is that?
No, he's from Guernsey.
Okay, that's the dash threw me there.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that this is the guy who teaches at Guernsey College.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Well, he will forever now be Dan Hunter Guernsey. Sorry, Dan. Gaming podcasts are 10 a penny these days, with hosts usually relying on their hyperbolic opinions, over the top reactions to attract the masses. Among the cacophony of inferior podcasts is the excellent Dev Game Club, a play-along book club type affair where, due to their extensive game development backgrounds, LucasArts, Skyrim, Fallout, Tomb Raider, etc., the hosts, Brett and Tim, know their stuff. The premise is simple: to look back at classic games and to discuss their relevance at the time, the game design, and how each game has influenced modern game design. The interview episodes where they talk to key players behind the games played are brilliant. The hosts love this medium, and their enthusiasm and passion spills through into every episode. This podcast has been my required reading list on the game design course I teach. Entertaining, insightful, and excellent. Wow, Dan.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's very kind.
Very kind, overly kind words for us who we kind of know what we're talking about.
We're fumbling our way
around just kind of
these
say
older
whatever
games.
comes to mind. Appreciate it, though. I'm glad it's helping.
I also have a 3-adjective subject, which is insightful, entertaining, and motivational.
Oh, so seriously? 2 out of the 3?
2 out of the 3. Slightly
good.
different order. I don't know if it's coming through more insightful to Zachary Crownover, if that is your real name. Is that Crownover? Cronover? I don't know. There's a number of ways I could pronounce this. Guernsey, Zachary Guernsey. What a highlight to each and every week. If you have a passing interest in video games as a medium, or if your feelings towards them are more akin to a passion, as is obviously the case with this cast, two incredibly personable and knowledgeable hosts, talking about me there, there's more than a decent chance that this will become your new favorite podcast. Every week brings with it a bevy of new observations and insights that serve to fill out and color the history of our favorite pastime. This commentary is fascinating to consumers of video games and invaluable to those with some sort of involvement in the industry, however tangential. In addition to being a wonderful accompaniment to just about any of your day-to-day activities, I've personally found this cast highly motivational in terms of encouraging me to buckle down and actually play certain titles that I likely would have gone years or perhaps my entire life without experiencing. Having a weekly progress goal works wonders in ensuring that I don't pick up a title for a few hours before setting it down again to collect dust in the shadow of something newer and flashier. And the fact that you then get to play a role, either actively or passively, in the ensuing conversation is just a delightful bonus. Please don't miss out on this wonderful treat, as it's delicious and good for you. So thank you, Zachary. Wow. That's super kind.
Also very good. Wow.
I love the thought of it motivating you to play that back catalog, because all of us have them. We all have Steam libraries that are, whatever. Mine's over 100 games, 10 of which I've actually played through, and many that I have not and may never not at the rate I'm going.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I got to say it's even a good point for me. I think we say this probably from time to time anyway, but. Even for us, like in my day job, and I'm sure in Brett's as well, like the games of the day, right? The most recent releases come up all the time, right? And so we're always talking back and forth. Okay, have you played this? Have you played that? What do you think? What are we going to take from it? Not steal from it, but like what lessons and stuff. And but we tend to focus on the modern games, right? Because that's what our competition is, or that's what's out there right now. But the thing that this podcast has really reinforced with me, which I obviously intellectually always knew, but never really applied, as Zach is saying, like it's forcing me to play these older games. I'm learning just as much, if not more, from the past games, right? Like playing the next modern X genre that is just, an entertainment product that is doing its entertainment things. You're going to learn some stuff from, but, to really like dig into stuff, these, playing these classic games, I have, for me at least, have been more inspirational and more informational than if I were to just play every single release that comes out today. So anyway, that's my perspective at least. Yeah,
they're also, for me, who's been working with small teams now for a couple of years, it's also just inspirational for me of like, you actually can do quite a lot with a small team, especially these days where we have a leg up. Like I don't have to code all of an engine in order to make a game that sells the engine. I can use Unity or Unreal depending on what the goals are, and there's other things too. And so I actually then can do sort of like all the other stuff, all the game stuff that's unique to what I'm doing, and not have to do a lot of sort of boilerplate stuff. And they were basically doing all the boilerplate stuff on much slower machines, obviously. And of course, the games look different as a result. They're old looking. But it is kind of great to be like, oh, yeah, it is possible to make games with 10 or 12 people. I mean, I know that intellectually, but playing more of those games kind of helps as well, especially when these were like cutting edge when they were made. Sort of helps me keep that in mind. It's as the sole programmer right now on a project, it's just helps me get through the idea that, oh yeah, I actually probably can program everything that I need to in this game. I'll probably get somebody to help with things that I particularly don't like doing, but sort of the guts of the game that I'm digging into, I can probably do, and that's encouraging for me as well. So that helps me.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right.
Next up is emails. Yeah, we're going to go to email. I said I would tell people you can send these in to devgameclub@gmail.com. We had 4 or 5 emails this week, so I want to thank in advance Derek and Aaron. We'll get to yours next week. We're just starting to run a little late. And we had a fun game suggestion that I'll talk with you about offline from Raphael. We like those too. We don't usually read sort of game suggestions on the cast. We don't want to get people's hopes up, but there's often interesting ones that come in. So thank you. You can send those in as well. We love to have them, and then we kind of kick it around whether it makes sense for us. But yeah, go ahead with the first one. There are a couple of long emails. That's why we're only going to do 2.
Okay, legendary games. That's the subject, from Mikael Lodahl, you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Danish, right? I believe, yeah. Anyway, okay, so let's see. Legendary games. Listening to your King's Quest episodes, I get this weird form of nostalgia. It's not about playing the King's Quest games, because I never played them, but of thinking about them reverently. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I can read. I'm not unconsciously.
Unconscionably.
Boy. Use
I should have
words
done this
here
one.
for you, Mikhail. Yeah. Sorry. Reading is my first language. Unconscionably young, but there is definitely a past history of computer games that I never played myself, but which I heard about in whispered tones as legends when I started out playing games. This gave me a sense of history coming before me, which has a weird effect on a kid. It's simultaneously inclusive, since you feel you're part of something bigger, and exclusive, since you feel like you'll never be able to have been there when the games were new. I think the best examples of this phenomenon is not in computer games, but in legendary D&D modules like the Temple of Elemental Evil or the Keep on the Borderlands. Starting out with D&D, it was very clear that there were these classic modules that were basically taken as read by designers of the second edition, where I came in, but they just weren't available. Since the rule set I had access to was second edition, and the modules were first edition. Even if I could track them down, I'd have to play in a different edition or revamp the module for second edition myself. A pretty good analogy for emulation of porting, I think. Yeah, that is a good analogy.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely good analogy.
Yeah. Combining this with your Ultima Underworld episodes, a game I could surely have played in its time, but for some reason didn't, which made me aware of so many game developers who obviously had this as a central title in their design canon, made me want to ask you a couple questions just to get your thoughts on, well, my thoughts, I guess. Okay, number 1, do you have any games that you know of only as legends and never played back in the day? Your history stretches back a little further than mine, so you could probably have played most of the classics as they were released, but still, if you missed some, can you recognize my ambivalence? And then 2, as you know, I teach game development students, and I'm struggling with how to approach the classics in game history. Most of my students started out playing games on the PS1 or the N64, which means there's decades of games they've only heard of. Obviously, you and I think there's value in knowing the history, but since I'm not working in hour-long podcast form, but in more limited lecture run form, I usually have to choose between either a deep dive into 1 or 2 titles or a longer, less detailed overview of the entire history, which has the advantage of surprising them with the long history, as well as pointing out some cycles in how technology and business works. Do you have any thoughts about what might be most useful to upcoming developers? Is there a difference in which upcoming and being upcoming and being established? Were you actively seeking out legendary games right from the start of your career, or has it come later? Keep up the great work. He says, Venlig Hilsen, which I guess means kind regards.
Yes.
And he is a senior lecturer and director of institute at the Institute for Danish Game Development. Wow, sorry for butchering your email, sir.
Sorry. I will next time. I'll filter this and I'll make sure I get the one-syllable words to Tim.
It's true. I'm a big dummy. There's no hiding that. Some really.
I mean, in terms of games that are legends, I didn't know if you would be able to think of any while you were reading.
Well, if you should go first, but I'll think about it. It's an interesting, hard question. I will say, like one that always comes to my mind is Mule for me, and I think that's
a good one.
I think it was because I didn't really have access to it. It was multiplayer, right? And
it was single computer multiplayer.
Yeah, it was just such a different, weird game. And also, there were definitely a few games, a handful of games, because I didn't have a Commodore 64. I had an IBM, and so I feel like, there were so many exclusives on the Commodore 64 that I missed out on too. I had a friend that had a C64, so I would go over there and play on his machine. But so I got a little bit of a taste of it. There was a Dungeons and Dragons game, I think, on that, or
there was, yeah.
That was pretty good. So those are some of the ones that come to my mind right off the bat.
For me, there are games, of course, some that we've played on the cast, and some of which I had kind of gone back and played bits of, or played similar titles to. So some of the Super Metroid and the early Marios and things like that we've talked about. But also, for me, I've never played a Mega Man game. I've never played Bomberman. That's another one I thought of that kind of came to mind. So there's an era of consoles, basically with the NES, the SNES, and the I did play some of the Genesis, actually, because somebody had it in my college dorm. They had brought theirs from home, and so we played some of those games, including like Flashback, which is getting a re-release later this year, I think, on the Switch, and which maybe we'll play for that, because I would really like to get through that game, because I don't think we ever did. Or maybe we'll play Another World for that, because that's very similar kind of style. Anyway,
Another World,
but
I'm thinking.
Other stuff from that, I can't think of anything that really stands out. I was actually fairly lucky. I mean, I didn't have a console. My first console I ever owned was a PS2, but I had neighbors and friends who had Ataris. I had a friend who was an only child, so he had both a Intellivision and a Commodore 64. And I had a friend who had a Vectrex, as well as something else. I can't remember what else he had. So I actually got a fair bit of visibility into games like that. And of course, the other one would be arcades, which I really enjoyed when I was young. That was still a thing.
I spent a lot of time in arcades and pretty much played everything. We had some good Chuck E. Cheese type places that had everything, I feel like, as it came out. The other phenomenon that happened for, I think, our generation that Mikkel probably can harken back to as well is like in the N64, in the SNES era, for me, at least, for most people, I feel like, and it's not too dissimilar than it is today, but games are kind of ported to both platforms for the most part. There aren't that many exclusives, but you kind of had to pick. Are you going to get an SNES or are you going to get a Genesis? You know what I mean? Mm. And so not a lot of people had both. Like you said, they were the only children and stuff, but I went Genesis at that time. So I actually missed out on a lot of the SNES stuff. I think, as I talked about probably when we played Super Mario World. So, there's sort of like a blind spots there because you just didn't have the platform. So, right. I played a lot of Genesis stuff, but, not everything showed up on both. So that was one. The other one that I was going to mention that I feel like on the PC side that I don't know if it was through choice or whether it was just access, but I feel like there were a lot of kind of classic strategy war games like Avalon Hill. Like there was just, the SSI stuff.
Like Art of War type stuff.
Yeah, that they were really popular in that era, and I just didn't play any of those, and I've always felt like I missed out on a whole kind of genre of that one. So anyway,
like the random games or whatever.
What's that?
Panzer, and then
Panzer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Panzer's one, and they just had a really good run for.
Also, some of the games that we talked about with Larry Holland, as well as far as those simulations went. Mm-hmm. Although we had played some of those, there were maybe his earlier titles. I was like Pegasus, HMS Pegasus. I didn't play, and there's also like earliest Will Wright games. I never played Raid on Bungling Bay, which is one I'd like to someday revisit, just because it's where he started. Though I did play SimCity and Sim Earth and Sim Ant. Like I played a lot of his sim games. Just later, I feel pretty lucky. I went and looked through some materials and was like, yeah, actually, I've played quite a lot of the sort of old classics. The ones that I haven't played are often a little bit more obscure and would have been sort of, well, what machine did you have? Kind of questions more than anything else. The other question he asked was about how to approach the classics in history. I think with a lecture, that's pretty tough to. I mean, I think that you need to kind of give a survey, honestly, just so you sort of understand when certain genres came out and stuff. But it makes me wish that it would also have the time for kids to have like a lab session where they are playing them and explaining them to each other or something like that, and like, here's a dozen games for your dozen students or 24 students or whatever. We sort of did this when I taught a course a few years ago, and we had a number of indie games that were downloadable and very cheap or free. And we had different kids from the class actually give a presentation about a game for like 5 or 10 minutes, in like groups of 2. And that was really kind of an interesting way to do it, because they were getting sort of a survey, and then individuals had actually played each game in depth and could kind of, pull out salient stuff that you might not think of just doing a survey. So that was kind of fun, as a way that we approached that, because we wanted them playing games as well. But in terms of whether that's the most useful, I don't know. I mean, I think there's use in playing things deep, but there's also use in knowing about a lot of stuff. So it's hard to know.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of sort of film history that, in my past in college and stuff. And they have, like you said, they have both types of courses, right? They have the go broad and the go deep kinds of courses. And I appreciate both. I don't know if you can really do both in one class, though. I agree. I think it's the one thing kind of going through high school now with my daughter, and we're getting in. I don't know. It's just interesting to talk about it from a what books are they studying kind of way, right? And how many books do they study in a semester?
Not enough.
Yeah, not enough. But it's like the one interesting the correlation I'm trying to make is, it's just a handful of them, but it's like, I don't know, whatever, maybe 6 to 8 or something like that. But it's just enough where it's a bit of the middle of the road where they've chosen pretty widely different genres and can go deeply enough into the time they have, into each of those. So they kind of skip the rocks off of the water of a certain genres enough so they can get a kind of a foundational understanding. And then hopefully that carries forward into the next year and the next year and the next year. So maybe it's like a strategy of over multiple years rather than just one semester thinking about it. You know what I mean? Like stringing them together. So you get a light foundation one, the first semester, and then the second semester, you build upon that. I guess ideally you'd have to hope that they take both classes, but because they may not. But so you kind of go deeper over time rather than trying to go deep into one class.
This is at a game development specific institute, right? So it's maybe they have a little bit more likelihood to have that kind of
consistency.
Depth. In terms of whether I was seeking out legendary games from the start of my career, I did definitely start playing when I went to LucasArts. I didn't have my then wife with me in California, so I actually had a lot of time on my hands, and in addition to reading, I was actually playing a lot of games. And she actually for several years was traveling a lot as well, so I had a lot of time often to sort of dive into stuff, and there was a really big library at LucasArts. It was like being a kid in a candy store. So I was actually going, and part of why I've played a lot of the games that I have is that I was filling in gaps that I was like, oh, I really wanted to play this game, and it was there in the library, and I could get it. And there wasn't, for me at that time, I didn't feel like this sense. I mean, it developed over the next couple of years of being there, but I didn't feel this sense of like having to go get the next new game immediately all the time, which I think is much more part of the games culture now. And has, I mean, I haven't bought a game on the day it came out in quite some time myself, but it sort of was my way I was for a good decade there. But when I started at LucasArts, I was definitely going and finding often LucasArts titles, honestly, that I hadn't played. But like I hadn't played India and the Fate of Atlantis until I started at LucasArts, and things like that. So yeah, I did actually kind of I kind of lucked into the opportunity to be able to spend time and do that. Basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. My easy answer to that question is no. I feel like I don't want to say that the industry wasn't self-reflective and academic about what we did at that time, but I really just don't think it was. I think Brett is unique in his approach that, like you said, he had time to do it, but also the desire. You had to have the desire. You could have spent time doing other things with that free time that you had. And I think that shows a lot of good discipline there. But my memory of that time is it was such the Wild West, right? And everyone was just constantly just looking forward and what can we do next? And what's the next thing coming out? And it's just that kind of bravado about what the industry really was. It's still forming, right? But it was really forming back then, and nobody knew what the heck was going on or what and GDC was even just getting started, right? So there wasn't even really, there were no schools basically, right? So when I got into it, and so there wasn't this thirst for kind of the academic analysis of things for games. So I think it would be pretty, other than if you had like a game from your childhood that you really loved replaying. I don't remember a lot of people going back and playing it when they got into the industry. They just wanted to play the next hotness, and now I really appreciate that that's happening more, that we do have schools devoted to this, as Mikkel is working for one, and we do have a really robust GDC, and we have DICE, and we have all these sorts of things. So I'm kind of proud of that. But at the time, I definitely didn't.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mikkel.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome.
Venlig Hilsen to you as well.
Send me some more big words so I can butcher them and look like an idiot sound like an idiot.
I particularly appreciate that. So indeed, keep that coming. I have the other email we're going to read this week. It's from Guy Morgan. If that is your real name, it could just as well be Guybrush. Anyway, it says point and click adventures. So that's why it could be Guybrush. Hi, gents. Thanks for all the podcasts you've spent your time making. I started listening about a year ago now and have gradually made my way through the back catalog. Congratulations on getting over the 100 episode marker. I hope you'll have loads more. So far, my favorites have been the episodes on XCOM, Soul Reaver, Fallout, and most recently, Ultima Underworld. The first two were games that I grew up playing, XCOM on my parents' Pentium P60, who knew Pentiums went that low, and Soul Reaver on the Dreamcast with a short stop-off with the N64. I've also recently found my old Game Boy Pocket, and thanks to you guys, I'm now stuck straining my eyes playing Link's Awakening. I seem to remember the screen being a lot bigger back then. I also forgot there was a control for the contrast on the side, so I spent a long time thinking that the screen had broken when I rediscovered it. Anyway, having listened to the podcast and meaning to write in a few times, finding that Game Boy and you guys doing a series on adventure games has made me make a bit more time to write in. The first point-and-click game I remember playing was Discworld, which was released in 1995 when I was 10. Looking back, I might have been a bit too young to figure it out, and you guys talking about tip lines reminded me of this game, specifically because some of the logic was way, way beyond me. I'm from somewhere near Liverpool, UK, and the Discworld game was published by Psygnosis, who had the absolute coolest logo. That's true, they had a very good logo, who were based in Liverpool. This meant that when I got stuck, which was often, the tip line was local rate. That's right. A 10-year-old idiot could regularly and cheaply ring the tip line when they got stuck. I got stuck a lot. I think the guy at the end of the phone actually ended up knowing me by voice. And to that guy, I can now see how annoying that would be, and must therefore issue this heartfelt apology, which I hope somehow reaches them. If you worked on the Psygnosis tips line between 1995 and 1997, sorry, mate. So, Tim and Brett, thanks for the podcast and for reminding me of the times when I used to drive a tips line guy totally nuts. Cheers and keep up the good work, Guy Morgan.
That's awesome.
I thought that was pretty great because I can remember just how I can feel myself in the moment of making that phone call and like wanting to keep it as short as possible because I just didn't want to get caught. And it just was such a panic for me because I was calling Oakhurst, probably. I mean, Oakhurst, California. I don't know where, but it was a certain amount of money per call, I think. But it was a long distance call besides, so it was just, it was. I'm sure I was always convinced that part of their business model was, you know what I mean? Like they were Sierra specifically. I feel like made a lot of money off of that stuff. Well, and the hint books and the hint books, just like it felt icky somehow, because obviously there were the other kinds of toll calls that young kids would try to make sometimes that they shouldn't be. So it kind of got bucketed into that, but that's hilarious to live in the town. I will say that there was a bit of my desire of to play the Sierra game specifically was I actually at the time because I lived and grew up in California and we lived in the foothills of the Sierras, so there was a sort of kind of a giddiness to knowing that they were not that far away. I think it was still a long distance for me, but it still was in the neighborhood. So and their company name was Sierra. So, and it's, Half Dome is part of their logo. So it was neat to think that they're nearby. And I always had a dream that I would work there someday, but I guess that one is going to have to be a dream deferred. Yep. Maybe I'll reboot the company someday. Oh yeah. Good luck with that. It's still a brand. Who owns the brand now? I don't even know. I think Activision, maybe, because they released that King's Quest reboot, episodic. Reboot, you're right, because these games that we've actually downloaded from GOG are also from Activision. Are they? Yeah, I didn't notice that. I'd forgotten that, but that's true. I guess they bought up all the old text adventure properties because they bought Infocom as well. Yeah, I think when Vivendi, when they sold it off, I think that was one of the things. Anyway, well, thank you for those emails, gents. Like I said, Derek and Aaron, we will get to you next week. Sorry we're not fitting you in this week, but it'll give us something to talk about next week. And again, you can send those to devgameclub@gmail.com. we're gonna finish Space Quest, I guess, right? That's it. We're gonna do one more week of this.
Yeah, I should have. I think we should have played a little bit farther this first time. But yeah, we'll finish it off. It should be doable. It's not like King's Quest. It's not terribly long, but we'll see how stuck we get.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a bit stuck on Kerona, and it was helpful. I had in the chat, I had people saying, "Do you want a hint?" And I'd say, "I actually just want to know if I can move forward." Yeah. And just being able to know, oh no, you're broken, and going back a ways was all the help I really needed. I don't need the solutions. I can figure those out, but there are times where not knowing that the game is over for you is
yep.
How would you know? And you just like spin your wheels forever.
Yeah.
And keep exploring. And maybe I missed a room.
Oh yeah, it'll drive you mad. I mean, that's my whole point. Like I think that that infamous place where I got stuck in Space Quest, it was probably over a year that I was stuck.
Oh, Jesus.
I was just like, I'd think about it from time to time. I'd go back and fool around and then, I'll tell the story tomorrow or next time.
And then you came across that puzzle where you had to pronounce unconscionably. So.
And reverently.
And reverently.
Like, oh boy.
Anyway.
Curse you, Mikhail.
I'm going to stream them. I put this out on the Twitter, which is @DevGameClub, but I stream, try to stream the games that we're playing on twitch.tv/Brett Douville, no underscore, on the weekends. I'm actually this week also going to play some Fallout 3, which is a game that I worked on. And I'm thinking I might do that for a while. Like a night or two a week, and that'll probably be Thursday night. So you can either follow me on Twitter to find that. I don't know if I'll put it on Dev Game.
You just playing that cuz, or what's this? What's just
I'm just playing it just because I'm curious. It's been a decade since that game came out, almost. Yeah. It'll be 10 years this fall, and I don't know. Something about a post-apocalyptic Washington D.C. kind of appeals to me right now. I don't know why that is.
That's what I was fishing for, and you gave it to me. So
yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's good. You just want to go to the Capitol Mall and shoot some things or something.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Some big kind of bloated, almost mutated looking things with like crazy hair. I don't know why. I don't know where that's coming from, but I just have this need. Anyway, enough politics for now. Keep an eye on my Twitter, which is @Brett_Douville for that. And he's at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And we'll see you next week when we finish Space Quest. Thanks so much, and good night.
Good night. You cannot use what I just did on the air at any point in time, by the way. I just realized what happened.
It's my new ringtone.
You have too much control.